You've probably noticed that for every appearance Mrs. Hawking has ever made as an adult in this series, she only ever wears one color. Black day dresses, black evening wear, black outerwear, and of course, her stealth suit is in black. And while it really worked for a badass stealth operator like our hero, there's actually another reason why she's always seen wearing black. We learn very quickly, right at the beginning of the series, that Mrs. Hawking is a fairly recent widow. The loss of her husband, Colonel Reginald Hawking, just over a year ago, is the major reason why Nathaniel feels like he has to see that she's looked after, which leads him to hiring Mary.
In truth, more than the help, I think she could do with the company.
So in a way, Mrs. Hawking's widowhood is the inciting event of the entire story. Mourning the deaths of relatives was a highly ritualized process in Victorian England, particularly if you were a widow. It consisted of a year of withdrawing from all social activity and public events and replacing one's entire wardrobe with black crepe.
It's been some time since you've made an appearance in society.
Had you not heard? My husband died. I've been in mourning.
And even when that year was over, the period of half-mourning ensued, curtailing the widow's life for another year, only now her wardrobe expanded to allow white, gray, and pale purple. And of course, the burdens of mourning were significantly more restrictive to women than they were to men, as it was assumed that they had no need for a public life. And it laid heaviest of all upon the wives that were left behind, reflecting just how much it was against the social order of things for a woman not to have a husband. However, while these behaviors were societally mandated, Mrs. Hawking found a way to use them to her advantage. This expectation of withdrawal and retirement meant that our hero had an excuse to hide from polite society,
We haven't seen you since Christmas.
which helps protect her superhero activities from prying eyes. A grumpy loner like her is of course delighted to have an excuse to keep people away, and her personal eccentricities are excused in most people's eyes by the peculiarities of grief. It works so well, in fact, that she's elected to remain in an apparent state of deep mourning even after the prescribed period for it has passed by. This was unusual for Victorian widows, many of whom wanted to return to public life and even marry again, but it wasn't unheard of. Queen Victoria herself normalized living in a state of perpetual mourning after the loss of her husband, the Prince Consort Albert, who she genuinely grieved until the end of her life. And of course, from a semiotic standpoint, the constant black suits a character who can be so stern, brooding, and closed off from the people around her. But even though this worked so well for Mrs. Hawking, like any time somebody has to defer to the limitations of their repressive society, there is a cost to committing to this life. Whether she likes it or not, her behavior is interpreted by everyone around her as an endless suffering without her husband, even a struggle to function as a person without him.
I'm sorry, madam. It must be painful to speak of him.
Mrs. Hawking's true feelings about the Colonel are much more complicated than that, and she resents having to pretend otherwise.
Oh, for God's sake, boy, it wasn't that I hated him! At least I didn't at first.
Even beyond that, it gives credence to the assumptions of the day that women are fragile creatures ruled by their emotions, who need men in order to complete them and hold them up.
It's good that she has a man, such as yourself, to mind her when she can't be trusted on her own.
Even though it works to her advantage, it's painful for her to have to validate those fallacies. Mrs. Hawking is a character who is constantly working to push the boundaries of her society to the point where they no longer cage women.
I mean to tear down the crumbling walls of life and shore them back up.
But even those who challenge the way the world works still have to live in it.
I was not meant for the lot of women. Certainly not that part of it.
Being able to take into account all the ways that characters are shaped by the culture they live in adds a layer of realism and complexity to the stories that we're telling, which enriches and further builds out our world. And you can see all of this as Mrs. Hawking continues her story here on our YouTube channel.